Well, hey, happy Wednesday to everybody. Welcome to the Small Church Pastors Podcast. As always, I am Pastor Cody, joined by my best friend and fellow pastor, Tim. How are you today, Tim?
I'm doing good. Did you make that riff for that introduction on your guitar?
I did that down in my theater room with the bass.
Yeah.
But new intro, no more countdown. New intro there to kick us off the Small Church Pastors Podcast. The question of the day is this: when you were a kid, what name did you give your favorite toy or stuffed animal? Drop your answers in the comment sections. When you were a kid, what name did you give your favorite toy or stuffed animal? Tim, I'll let you go first this morning.
I don't know if I had a special name for a special toy. I just remember my football when I was like 2 years old was super special to me. And
Did you call it Wilson?
I did not call it Wilson. I don't even know what it was. Probably Rawlings. And then I had a specific plate I would eat dinner off of every time. And then I just remember Teddy Ruxpin and Stretch Armstrong. Those were the biggies.
I never had a Stretch Armstrong. I didn't really have a lot of stuffed animals. The one thing I did have was I had a Cromwell Cabbage Patch deals. I still have that. It's still in the box, and it's never come out of the box.
That's creepy.
But and then I had a bear that had it was green and had like a 4-leaf clover on it. But other than that, I mean and it didn't have a name. I had a lot of invisible friends.
That explains everything.
So like I was, I didn't watch cartoons as a kid. I watched like the Dukes of Hazzard and Chips and stuff like that. So I had my invisible friends was John and Punch from Chips. So
really. Have you ever seen the movie Drop Dead Fred? It's about a girl who had an imaginary friend as a kid and it came back.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I would always talk to myself about John and Punch and stuff like that. And I'd play Chips in the driveway on my bike with John and Punch. And if a car drove by the street, I'd run out of the bushes and jump on my bike and act like I was going to go chase them down, pull them over.
Yeah, maybe the better question of the day would be, who is your imaginary friends?
Oh, as a could kid? Be. Did you have imaginary friends?
No.
But, we grew up in a time where you had to use your imagination.
Yeah. Well, I do remember when I was being babysat, we were probably 4 or 5 years old. I remember a girl that was babysat there too, and I was kin a lot playing house.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah, I can remember in junior high playing. Did you ever play school?
No.
Yeah, I played school, house. I can remember when I was real little with some people in our church, I'd stay with them and we would play Dukes of Hazzard. And like the daughter was Daisy, and then the boy had bunk beds, and that was the General Lee. And so we'd sit in the bed and pretend like we were driving, jump out of the bed, and I'd go rescue Daisy and all this stuff. But
yeah,
I didn't have
TikTok and Reels and all that stuff.
Yeah, I will say I just remembered this. I did have a very special duck. I never named it anything, but it was a duck that was given to me when I was 17 months old and I had my heart surgery at the hospital.
Well, that's where you can lean into being an Oregon Ducks fan, since the Sooners are.
Yeah. But it's hard when you don't have an offense.
Yeah. So, well, thanks for the quarterback.
Yeah. Well, that's so I don't want to dive into that. It has nothing to do with Dillon and Oklahoma. It's more of everybody going ooey and awee over Sanders at Colorado, and it's just like, you're telling me he's a better quarterback right now than Dillon?
Yeah. Well, who knows?
I mean, Dillon plays in my mind a little bit tougher conference.
Yeah.
His team is undefeated. His team is number one.
Just broke the FBS touchdown responsible record.
but we're gonna say that the leading candidate for the Heisman is a guy from Colorado who has 2 losses because his dad is prime time.
Yeah, who knows?
Come on, man. Anyway, this is a small pastor's
Small Church Pastors CFB podcast.
yeah, this is not a sports podcast, but
Yeah.
anyway, so well, with that, like I said, drop your answers in the comments section. With that, we're going to move into our small church topic of the day. It's kind of an interesting one. It's kind of a sad one as well, but I was Googling today because I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and we didn't really get the I don't think we ever got a number, but we had in some form or fashion in a conversation we talked about what the percentage of in the country or what are small churches, and I looked that up the other day, and it's actually 90%, and that's under 200, with the majority of that 90% being under 100 people in a church. And so when I think about small churches making up 90% of churches, I ask the question, why are small churches closing their doors today, Tim?
Yeah, well, there's 100 different reasons, but all you need to do is get online, do some research. I'll share this with you. I'll just do a big topic overview. I'll share that. Is that up there? Yep, there we go. So as I scroll down, you see it. Number 1, maintain insider focus. This is from 7 Reasons Why Small Churches Get Stuck by Tony Morgan. Maintain insider focus. Everything they do is designed for the person who already attends. The senior pastor does all the ministry. They value busyness over relationships. Everyone has a vote. They're unwilling to move to 2 services, which I actually don't agree with that one. But the teaching doesn't provide life application. They want different results without any change. So that's just a quick overview of some topics that come out of that. And not that guy's 100% correct on all of those issues, but
I mean, I know you have not done the 2 service thing, but we have, and it was a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, to preach twice. Now, I think if you're in a huge church with 15, 2,000, 3,000 people, I can see doing multiple services. But
yeah, I saw where I've seen some planning center plans where it's like the pastor comes in, gives the sermon, and then he's actually turns right around and goes to a different building and gives the same sermon. Does the same sermon for a different service. And it's just interesting how you can live like that. We did do 2 services way back in the day, and it ended up morphing. It's too much to do 2 different song sets.
Oh, and I didn't know you guys did 2 services.
Yeah, back in 2008, 2007, 2008, we did an 8 o'clock.
You were a youth pastor then,
yeah.
weren't you?
Yeah. And we'd have a handful of people go to the first service, handful of people go to the second service. But it's not like we were busting at the seams to do that. I think it was more of a strategic plan to get different song sets that meant different things to different people. But it ended up morphing into just doing the same song set in the same service. And so we're like, why are we putting a bunch of resources into that? Now, I wasn't in the decision-making process back then. And if everybody showed up on the same Sunday, we'd be shoulder to shoulder. And we've talked about doing a second service very briefly. But for our context, the only way we do that is if people were standing in the back, like standing up, we might move to 2 different services. But I would rather just expand and get everybody
right
in one place based on our demographics and what we have going on. So, which would be hard in this room to do. So we'd have to plan something. But I personally like a single service on Sunday where in our town, it makes more sense to get those relationships built. But we would go to 2 services if something happened to where we had the resources to do it. I think one of the things we talked about earlier before the podcast started was this mentality of, I guess, majoring on the minors, where in any organization, I see this throughout all kinds of different committees and organizational structures is kind of like the good old boy thing. This is just what we do.
Oh yeah.
Instead of a relationship, the motivation of inserting yourself into a spiritual home, the church, is this is just what I do. I just come to church, and then I want to run this from a man centered place where it's like runs more like a club. And I think small churches do that, especially when you have changeover in someone saying, hey, can we do things a little bit different? It's like there's this protection, circle the wagons and protect what we already have. Another thing is just doing the same old thing, expecting different results, and then spiritualizing those things where it's like, we've done it this way, and my spiritual formation was in this, and so we have to do it this way because that's what God expects. But if you were to pluck those people out of the local church, the way it's always been done, and put them in the first church in the first century, they'd be lost, and they wouldn't have any argument like, we need to do this way because I was spiritually formed this way. So it just takes hard conversations of what is God doing among these people, and then also having the mindset that the church service isn't for us. Number one, it's for God. Number two, it's to edify, and it's to educate and edify. So the hard talks have to be, what are we doing that helps edify people and bring them into the presence of God without distracting them, distracting other people, doing things with excellence, all those things that come into play of the why are we doing this, and are my personal preferences being uplifted over the ability to glorify God in this and let people see what bringing people into the presence of God looks like without going, that was weird. So
yeah. Well, I can remember, I don't know, you might have been, well, I know you were in Oregon or there in Doofer when this happened, but I went to a CIY and went to a workshop that had to do with worship, and Randy Garris led that class, and he said something in there that has just, when it comes to thinking of church and worship and everything, that has really stuck out to me. And I try to guide people through this and use it as we plan worship. But what Randy Garris said was that, when we're born, you're born with a heart language. So for us, we're born in America, our heart language is English. That's what we know.
Yeah.
If you're born in Mexico, your heart language is Spanish or, whatnot. He said the same is for our spiritual birth. You have older people who came to the Lord through the hymns. That's their spiritual heart language. That's what takes them back to when they made that decision. He goes, the same is true for younger people today, are tied to the contemporary stuff. That's their heart language. That's what takes them back to the time when they decided to follow Christ. And it's not fair for us to say, if we're on the, the traditional side, the hymn side, we're not going to sing those songs. You're denying that. And it's, it's vice versa. You can't do that. And so I've always tried to make it welcoming for everybody, no matter their heart language.
Yeah. And that's the hard talk of, are the people within a small church going to lay down their life? And that's what ends up working, is when everyone picks up a towel like Jesus and says, I'm going to wash your feet. And that's going to be I'm going to follow after the Savior in that. You can say that was done well for them. And and the other person says, well, I want to wash your feet too. Let's do something not for you, but to create an environment where we try our best to glorify God in those moments for everyone. And the problem is sometimes you can't do it. You can do it for everyone in blocks of people. That's the wrong way to phrase it. But to know your congregation and shepherd them in that way, the sticking point comes when one person says, I want to be served this way, instead of the collective saying, we want to serve God and we want to serve each other. And that's when you can have change and growth is when someone knows that you're serving them, they're willing to serve as well. I think we shoot ourselves in the foot when we individualize, this is what I want.
Right.
Because if I tried to push what I wanted, one of my favorite worship albums is Sunsets and Sushi by David Crowder. And it would not fit here at all. It would serve my needs of what I would like to see, but I know that it would not touch the hearts of other people. So
I've told you about this, but a lot of people, I mean, I've told some people around here, but I've been going through old boxes and finding a lot of hidden treasures that I had totally forgot I had. And one of the things I found was when I went to a youth ministry concert in California and Crowder was out it, and I actually got David Crowder's autograph on the program. I met David Crowder, but anyway, I found that just today. I was watching a video where he was doing an interview, and I never knew that David Crowder lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh, really? Yeah, I just saw his band Friday night. So here's that one that's like that. I don't know if I play it and we get a
probably get flagged for it.
So I wonder how many people would act. I don't think people would want like a remix of. Yeah. I don't know if you can hear the sound or not, but it's more of like a bassy remix thing. So, and I don't. One, we couldn't pull that off. Two, people would be looking around like, is this a rave? What's going on here? So
and now we're gonna get flagged by Facebook for having that music.
I don't think we had it. Well, we're using it for educational purpose. We'll put that in the educational purposes to illustrate a point. It's fair use.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. In my mind, it's sad that we're seeing so many small churches, closing their doors. I mean, we've had, since I've lived in this area, North Central Kansas, I know of 2 or 3 that have closed their doors.
Yeah.
And
another thing is a pastor shortage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean that's a whole nother road of why there's a pastor shortage. But
you don't get me started on well, and we'll dive into this just for a second. Is sometimes you're sitting around in the dorm where pastors are being trained, and you're like, as much as I love this person, I don't know if they've got what it takes.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and then they get placed in a church, and so that's why we have to have good pastors.
I'm probably a prime example of that.
No, well, no, like I said, we won't get into it.
I mean,
we all grow, so
yeah. But when I was at Ozark, my academic advisor at that time told me that, how did she word it?
You're not the sharpest.
No, she said something along the lines of, even C and D students can still lead somebody to Christ.
Ouch. No, probably the ones who are not. That's one of the problems too. Is the academic overachievers, not overachieve. The people who are talented academically sometimes don't turn out to be good people. Like they.
Yeah.
And sometimes the worst of us, I didn't do super well in various classes. Mostly had to do with the teacher, and didn't really. My excuses, I'd rather sleep than listen to them drone on. But
I just think back to when we took Jeremiah class together, and me and another friend spent all night studying. Tim wakes up 5 minutes before class, goes and gets a way better grade than all of us, and didn't study a lick.
Multiple choice. It's all. Yeah. If it's multiple choice, that's my jam. Have me write something.
Yeah.
It takes a research paper. I can pull it out, but it's multiple choice. That's the way my brain works, because I can study, get the right answer, and just dismiss all the other answers that don't make any sense, and get a good grade. So
yeah. But anyway, so Tim was probably.
There's a conglomeration of why small churches have struggles.
Tim would always break the curve. We never got the curve because of Tim. Yeah. He'd come in there with 100% on his test and didn't study a lick. But
Oh, I
anyway,
study. I just listen. I'm a person that can read it and then get it. I'm not a person that can. Um, I don't know.
yeah,
It just came easily. So
yeah. So anyway, so that's our small church topic of the day. With that, we're gonna jump into God's.
let me make an appeal for the small church people who are listening to this. Get in your brain to serve people. That's what
Yeah.
will turn it around. Where people are like, I'm going there because people are genuinely serving each other without any type of hidden agenda. They're not trying to get a job. They're not trying to sell me insurance. They're not trying to get on my good side for some public appeal of their character, but they're different behind closed doors. And all small churches deal with that because we all know each other's problems.
Right.
But when we put on the towel and we serve each other, that's how small churches will survive.
Yeah, and I would say if you want a good book to read, Thomas Reiner's "I Am a Church Member" is a very good book. He actually has a lot of and they're not very long; they're short books, but he has a lot of books on that I think are geared towards small churches, how to do outreach, how to make people feel welcome, what it means to be a church member. So if you're looking for a good read, I'd pick up any of that. So.
Yeah, the Outward Focused Church is a good one too. I can't remember the author.
But. Externally Focused Church.
Externally.
Book. Yep. Yep. So anyway, with that, we're going to jump into God's Word. You ready, Tim?
Yep.
All right. We are currently in a study in the book of 1 Peter. And this morning, we're going to continue in chapter 3 of 1 Peter. If you're with us last week, we got in just towards the end of the podcast, jumped into chapter 3. This morning, we're going to be in chapter 3 as well. So if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn to 1 Peter chapter 3. If not, don't worry. Like always, we'll have the scriptures on the screen. Tim, I want you, as we start to dive into 1 Peter chapter 3 today, I want you to think about a time when you have seen teamwork at its best. Maybe it was watching a sports team. Maybe it was reading about a rescue operation. Maybe it was witnessing a community rally to provide for a loss. As you think about that in your mind, how was unity on display, Tim?
Well, the most recent one that I can think of off the top of my head is the Oregon Ducks versus Maryland, where they allowed the big uglies, the linemen. I think there are 2 touchdowns by linemen that are maybe a 2-point conversion, where they shifted their line, and it was maybe it's Birch. I don't know. He's a 300-pound defensive lineman, or maybe it's a 300-pound offensive lineman. I can't remember what it was, but they just did some trickery. And we have to remember in these minds of these college players, how old are they?
Yeah.
19, 20. I remember 1920, be like, yeah, that, I mean, and so instead of doing the traditional playbook of, well, this is what we got to do, quarterback, running back, they were up a little bit and involved everyone with that. So that teamwork there, I've seen it in mission groups when we went to Oklahoma after the tornadoes several years ago, and just helped people get their stuff out of their houses, and actually tore down some housing so new housing could be built up, of seeing people come together and organizing and doing teamwork. So
yeah. Well, you look throughout the New Testament, and one of the things that you see is unity is constantly called for in the church. And here in 1 Peter, it's no exception. And so in our passage this morning, Peter's going to identify it as one of the ways in which we demonstrate the gospel to the world. And now, we started off this study in 1 Peter by making a really simple statement about identity, which was who you are determines what you will do. And so really our actions flow out of us as a result of our identity. And as we look to wrap up chapter 3, Peter is going to turn his attention to that very topic, actions. And really, to put it simply, he calls his readers to live out their convictions. And so we're going to look at verses 8 through 22 of First Peter chapter 3. I don't know if Tim wants to read this morning.
Yeah.
We got 3 slides, so
Finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you are called, so that you may inherit a blessing. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. For it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made a proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also, not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand, with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him.
Tim, as you read those verses, what do you consider some of, I guess, your core convictions?
Do not repay evil for evil. So easy to do. And what that does is Peter's appealing to an audience who has the indwelt feeling of the right to buck against the government or their employers, to say this I'm going to stand up and do what I want to do, even if it means doing evil to get the end result. But the end result should be had by patiently and gently calling people, giving the hope that's within them. So some core values that I have tried to implement from First Peter, and there's other scriptures that go with it, is if I'm slighted, figure out how to bless. If I'm asked to come in and do something that's wrong to get the right result, that's the wrong way to go about it. And that's really what our nation is facing. I remember one politician who said, well, I might not get the facts right, but my motivation for getting the right result is there. And so it's like, but so you don't care what the facts say. You have a moral obligation to whatever your end result is, and you'll do anything to get there. So in politics, you see that quite a bit. And back to the idea of the small church, you can see that happening in small churches when it turns into a good old boys club. Is they'll malign or repay evil for evil, or say, I'm doing the righteous thing, so I'm going to do this and this and this to get the end result, and it leaves a wake of destruction behind them.
I would say for me, and it's kind of bubbled to the surface in probably the last 4 to 8 years, I guess, is, and I just taught on this Sunday night at youth group, is really trying to, and I'll just go ahead and answer this with what my next question is, because my next question is of those core convictions, how do you demonstrate them in your day-to-day life? And so one of the things that I am really focused on right now, given the climate that our culture is right now, is to take Jesus's words of to love your neighbor as yourself and to demonstrate that daily. And I just taught Sunday night at youth group with our high school students of looking at scripture and making sure that no matter who is in leadership, whether they're on our side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle, that we are called to pray for our leadership and to give them respect and to love them. And so I think for me, that's one of the biggest things right now. As hard as it is to do sometimes, we're called to do that. And so I am striving each and every day to live that principle out of loving people.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to share this verse, Jude 1:9. But even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not dare to condemn him for slander, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." So that's one of those things. Is like you don't have to win the argument all the time. And we had one of those situations where city council member was unseated. I don't know if he resigned immediately or what happened, but he got on Facebook. Is like, now that I'm not a public official, I can tell you what I really think. And it was like, get your popcorn, Jerry Springer type atmosphere in that thread. And it's like, here's what you did is you're signaling to us that you had an internal motive that you didn't express to the public, and now you're wanting to express it, and you're going to get a backwards result that you actually want, and that's suspicion of your motivations when you were in that seat. So you didn't help yourself at all in that. And so that's what you see in a worldly standard is fakeness, or not doing the good in the moment that you know you're supposed to be doing the good, but kind of roundabouting getting there where people are like, what's really going on in that? And what happens is it stains the whole government board, because what are we actually getting here? So when it comes to First Peter, is letting your motivations be on your sleeve of why you're doing what you're doing. Internally, it's a good choice. Externally, I'm wearing on my sleeve, it's a good choice. So that way, when someone maligns you and says, that guy, that girl, that church member, they're not really who they say they are, the broader community can say, actually, you're wrong. We've seen the motivation and we've seen the goodness on their sleeve. So you're saying that they're doing a bad thing, but it's actually good. We see it. We see the fruit. When you internalize your motivations of saying you're doing something good, but actually the core of it's bad, people can see through that. So that's a motivation for Christians to be who you say. Jesus said it this way: let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything beyond that comes from the evil one.
Yeah. And, and Peter here, he's challenging his readers to live out their convictions in a culture largely hostile to their faith. Oh, lunch bell.
Lunch bell, yeah.
And so, you go back to chapter 2 at the very beginning, when we looked at that a couple weeks ago, and chapter 2, verse 11, Peter listed a number of ways that Christians ought to resist their sinful desires, including instructions related to civil obedience, slave and master relationships, and marriage. And so he concludes this instruction in verses 8 and 9 of 1 Peter 3 by listing a number of characteristics, beginning with unity. Tim, why do you think Scripture emphasizes unity among Christians?
Well, because we have a common goal to be formed in the image and likeness of Jesus. And I think back to the small church topic. I think a lot of people get their own kingdoms and fiefdoms they want to set up, and they don't keep their eye on Christ. And when you call for unity, some people are, this is what I want to unify over. This is what I want to unify over. This is a topic I should unify over. And you get factions. So Peter is saying, hey, you're gonna be pulled in various directions. Jesus is the cornerstone. He says that. We'll get to that in a little bit, right? Or did we? No, that was the second chapter.
Yeah.
About him being the cornerstone. Maybe the first chapter. So that's the motivating factor of we're pursuing Christ that unifies the decisions that come after that. But there also has to be disagreements. In First Corinthians, it says, I know that Paul says to his hearers, I know that there needs to be disagreements among you so we know what God's will is. So it's Jesus is the unifying factor. Out of that, here's the decision we need to make. We're going to disagree on it. But even in that disagreement, how does those two options or three options glorify Christ? And if you can answer those questions, then you can come to a unifying decision. I don't like this one. I don't like this one. I don't like this one, but I can see in the middle the motivation of unifying people over Christ. So we're going to go with this one, even though I might not think it's the best choice, but my unifying factor is Christ. I can see the argumentation on why that would honor Christ. And so I'll unify with these top priorities, even though I don't agree with the details down below.
Yeah. So my next question is the opposite of that. What does disunity communicate to those who are outside of the church?
Jesus isn't important. Your own opinions are important.
Yeah.
And who wants to be part of that dysfunction? They can get that dysfunction anywhere else.
Right. Yeah. And so to all those who are watching here on Facebook or YouTube, be thinking and reflecting on your own life. Some of the remaining qualities that Peter put on the list, sympathy, mutual love, compassion, humility. Reflect on your own life and how well does your life reflect those qualities? Be thinking about where maybe you can improve in those areas. Peter concludes the thought that he began back in chapter 2, verse 11, with one final command in verse 9, and that is to bless others, even those who pay you evil and insult. Tim, how do you tend to react to those who treat you poorly?
I don't care. I've stopped caring if they treat me poorly, because I try to take into account what Peter says is, even who cares? Like it's your.
I mean, are you have you been able to constantly bless them even though they're treating you poorly?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about that one. I want them to be blessed. Like I won't get into specifics, but there's a person in my life where they said this, that, the other thing about me, and I found ways to. I always look for ways to try to bless them. Or if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, did you hear about this? Look at what they're doing." They'll say something snarky about them. I say, I hope they're happy, and I hope that they are doing well. I want prosperity for them, regardless of what they think about me. So yeah, I just go,
Yeah.
Oh. Now if it's a legitimate issue where it's like they say, hey, here's a fault in your character, I have hope and love for you to fix that, then I have to listen and take it into account, not just dismiss it. But when we were at the North American Christian Convention, I can't remember who wrote it or who was there speaking. All I remember is that he said, "Don't look at my shirt. I just got out of the airport and it's not ironed," because it's all like checkerboard. But he said he was on vacation and it was during a hard time in ministry, and he'd gotten some anonymous letters about how he wasn't worth anything and was going in the wrong direction, didn't like him. And he was at the Eiffel Tower on a break, and he looked at the Eiffel Tower and he said, "Well, this is how we used to deal with those people," and like ostracizing. But he said, I came to the realization that I had to weigh my critics. And he said, have you ever been in the South where it's super hot, muggy day and there's gnats flying around you, and you could sit there and spend all your energy of this and bug spray, but you just go,
yeah,
you just they're annoying, but they're not worth spending a lot of time on dealing with. So if it depends on your relational structure. If it's someone close to you that's invested in you, loves you, then you listen to it if they're critical. And the further you get out, you're just like, it's just noise. And I think a lot of people in our culture, especially with the advent of social media, I think people get anxious about typing something or like putting something out there, or even in uh, breakfast with another person. Like, what are they going to think about this? And we get anxiety about it. And it's just like, weigh your critics and see what's true, what's not true. And those on the outside, you need to decide to bless them. So what the scripture said, the blessing for you comes through having these characteristics of weighing your critics, loving others, sympathizing, bearing one another's burdens. That's where blessings of God come through, not wanting retribution for them. So that's a big long answer of if somebody criticizes me, I weigh it out, and if I can ask somebody close to me, is this true? Then combat that by doing good, not by manufacturing some type of retribution or character assassination or libel or slander. Back to what the archangel did. He didn't. Well, you did this and you this. He let it go.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest. Blessing those who mean to hurt us, that is no easy task.
Yeah.
Because it runs contrary to our natural sense of justice, which is why it's only something we can do through faith. Our example is none other than Christ himself. And as Peter makes clear in verse 18 in particular, just focus on Christ's compassion, which he displayed constantly throughout his earthly ministry. And so, Tim, as you think about what Peter says there in verse 18, is there anybody in your life that you would consider an example of compassionate Christian?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can start rattling off names. Someone that everyone would know. Can't think of anything off the top of my head. Oh, I can think of one right now. When there was the mass shooting of the Amish in Pennsylvania? And it was almost immediately after that, one of the family members came out and said, we forgive, we have compassion for that. And that's probably one of the worst situations to go through. And I would implore people to look up that story of compassion. That's the one that comes top of my head.
Yeah. Are you pulling that up?
Yep.
Okay. I'll wait till you get it pulled up before I go on.
Yep, I got it right here. Well, so you can get it on NPR. Let's keep going down to it. Says Charles Roberts wasn't Amish, but Amish families knew him as the milk truck driver who made deliveries last month. It was announced that the Amish community had donated money to the killer's widow and her 3 young children. It was one more gesture of forgiveness, gestures that began soon after the shooting. Donald Craybill, a sociologist from nearby Elizabethtown College and author of Amish Grace, How Forgiveness Transcended Tragedy. I think the most powerful demonstration of the depth of Amish forgiveness was when members of the Amish community went to the killer's burial service at the cemetery. Several Amish families who had buried their own daughters just the day before, were in attendance, and they hugged the widow and hugged other members of the killer's family. Like, that's crazy to me. So,
well, and I think I've talked about this with you in the past, and I've talked with people here in my church. I've even talked about it, in one-on-one conversations through Sunday school, maybe even in sermons, is I struggle with those that did harm to us on 9/11.
yeah.
And being able just to say, I forgive you, God bless you. Like, I struggle with that. And so, I'm still working through that, and it's been, over 20 something years since that happened. But, God and I talk about that a lot. So
that's one of the things where I think Christians should take a deep, hard study into justice and what we're responsible for, and forgiveness. There can be justice for that. So take the 9/11 situation into account. Our government has been given the authority by God, Romans 8, to dole out justice. And so you can hold in one hand, I pray that the armed forces go and give justice to those who have killed innocent people. At the same time, during those moments, I pray that Jesus shows himself to those who deserve that justice, so that when I wake up in heaven, that person will be there. So you can have justice in one hand and forgiveness in the other. Much like if someone was to harm my family, I want justice for them. I hope they catch them. I hope they put them in jail. They can't hurt anybody else in their lifetime. But at the same time, I have to find the ability to forgive in that moment. So justice can happen and forgiveness at the same time. What we are asked not to do is individually go and give retribution or what we would think is justice, because our justice could be clouded by our anger.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you look at what Peter writes here, I think he's really calling his readers then, who he's writing to, and even us today, he's calling us to a distinct Christian lifestyle, a Christian lifestyle that pursues unity and extends blessings to its enemies, all for the sake of modeling Christ to the world. Now, we might expect to receive kindness from the world as a result, and after all, who would disapprove of being treated with blessing? But beginning in verse 13, Peter affirms that this could be the treatment we receive, but we could also become the targets of unjustified suffering, which is why our motivations for doing good are crucial. And so whether the world thanks us or whether they blame us for our faithfulness to Christ, Peter says that we are blessed. And ultimately, what Peter is arguing in this passage is that when we oppose unity in the church, or we seek to avoid suffering at any cost, then we reveal that our hope lies in our personal comfort more than the sufficiency of Christ. And so our behaviors always reveal our convictions. Tim, are there any ways that you're tempted toward pursuing personal comfort over Christ's call on your life?
Oh yeah, it's easier to sleep in sometimes.
Yeah,
got to get stuff done. It's easier to let that person who calls you 500 times, let it go to voicemail. It's easy to say I don't want to do this because I want to satisfy something in myself. Food comes to mind with that of really probably shouldn't be overeating, but I do. I think everyone struggles with that in some form or fashion. So there's plenty of things where the personal comfort, sugarcoating things. That's one of my biggest struggles. Is there's a specific thing that needs to be done, and then I'll say, well, it's really not that big of a deal. Explaining something to somebody else where they need to be motivated or change, and kind of downplaying it. So yeah, there's temptation all over the place.
I'll stop calling you 500 times.
Yeah, it's not you.
Verses 15 and 16 go even further in clarifying that point. Often verse 15 is used to encourage apologetic styles of evangelism, which aim to respond to intellectual arguments against the faith. And while there's nothing wrong with that style of evangelism, that's really not what Peter has in mind. And so when we actually consider the context, the previous verse encourages readers against fearing the prospect of suffering for their faith. Instead, Peter tells them to revere Christ in their suffering and be prepared at all times to give an answer for their hope. And in other words, what Peter is saying is Christian faithfulness amidst suffering speaks to those who witness it. People will ask why we are hopeful in suffering because that hope reveals our convictions. And when they ask, that gives us an opportunity to share the good news of Jesus. And so when people witness our compassion toward pain, our blessing toward insult, and our hope in suffering, that's going to cause them to wonder about our life, but it requires a commitment on our part to live according to our faith in every way possible. And so, as Christians, I think I don't think we think about this a lot, but as Christians, suffering provides us with an incredible opportunity to demonstrate the grace and the mercy of our God. Suffering is never pleasant, don't get me wrong, but we have to remember it's temporary. And we have a hope beyond this world that has been confirmed for us through the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And whether you find yourself facing difficulty or comfort right now, I just want you to rejoice in where God has you. And please understand, he has not abandoned you, and he is going to remain faithful to you no matter the circumstances you face in the days ahead. Tim, you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah. Check out this story that you need to, if you need to have some inspiration on how to go through suffering. It's Wurmbrand, Tortured for Christ. He's the one who started Voice of the Martyrs. And he was in Romania and was arrested for his faith, tortured, electrocuted. Electrocuted is not the right word. Shock therapy. Are you going to give up on this? Put his hands above his head and just torturing him. And that'd be a good story for people to get into their heads when it comes to these verses that Peter shares.
Yeah. And just so you know, I don't know if you know this or not, but the Voice of the Martyrs headquarters is in Bartlesville, Oklahoma.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Little trivia for the day.
A little trivia for the day. A little fun fact for the day. So, anyway, well, Tim, that does it for another edition of the Small Church Pastors Podcast. I hope everyone was blessed this morning by our study and our time together. Have a great rest of your week. And before we go, Tim, as I do every week, what are you preaching on this weekend?
Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 14, I believe. Just talking about the incarnation of Christ and why that matters.
Awesome. We're continuing in our series here of counting every blessing as we are marching forward to Thanksgiving in a couple weeks. Can you believe it's almost Thanksgiving time?
Yeah, I can. It goes by fast all the time.
Yeah. And in case you didn't know, Tim, Christmas is December 25th this year.
Oh, I know. December 20th. Thanksgiving's on my birthday this year. Or my birthday is on Thanksgiving this year.
Yeah. So that's awesome. You get a big feast.
Yep. Is that over the championship weekend? I don't know. We got 2 weeks, two regular season. Yeah, so it's probably right around then.
Yeah. So, all right, everybody have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the Small Church Pastors Podcast.